Welcome back. Now, as we approach Namibia's highly anticipated elections in just a few days away, with the campaigns intensifying and election fever gripping the nation, the atmosphere is charged with activities. However, this heightened energy often brings about tensions that can lead to practices that undermine the democratic process, such as the decampaigning, misinformation and propaganda, if you like. It is against this backdrop, the Code of Conduct for Political Parties established by Electoral Commission of Namibia aims to provide a framework to ensure fair and peaceful campaigning. Now, to help us unpack these concerns and shed light on the role of law ensuring integrity during the campaigns, we are joined this morning by Henry Shimutwikeni, a lawyer who is deeply vested in election matters. Henry, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure to have you. Now, as we approach the elections with campaigns becoming more intense, we've seen instances of decampaigning, including tearing down and burning down opponents' posters. This acts directly conflict with the Code of Conduct, which prohibits the destruction of campaign materials. In your expert opinion, how effectively is this, provision being enforced, and what legal actions can be taken against those who actually violate this law?
Yes. Look, I think the first thing to understand is that the players within this. Yeah. We're talking about the ECN. Yeah. We're talking about the police, which is supposed to maintain the order and ensure peaceful elections. Right. We're talking about political parties, and we're talking about voters. And I'm talking about voters as citizens, or even those who don't vote still have an interest in the process. So, yes, of course, we've seen certain acts being committed. We saw some stuff happen in the south. I think it was between the LPM and SWAPO. Yeah. We saw videos circulating of destruction of posters. We currently have songs as well too, which if deeply interpreted also violate the Code of Conduct. Right. But the important thing to understand is there are mechanisms, but at least highly publicized right now, we have not yet seen someone who was offended enough to deem it necessary to use those particular provisions. Right. It could be because perhaps they don't know that they have recourse. The recourse is there. But at this stage, perhaps any offense, let's say, for example, defamation. Right. One can say something, and if someone, it's a little bit harmful, but the moment someone deems it hurtful enough to constitute, according to them, defamation, then they take a further step. We have not yet seen any highly publicized events of someone feeling that a party or individual has violated the code sufficiently enough for them to warrant it. We haven't seen it. If it has happened, I'm not privy to that information.
Yeah. Now, we've also observed an increase in you mentioned defamatory now, and so I think it's something that has been socially said, be it on social media platforms or some perhaps in public, now including songs, slogans that aims to discredit or incite violence against political parties or political opponents. The Code of Conduct prohibits language that could incite violence. And so in your expert opinion, how do we balance, the right to free political expression with the need to maintain civility and prevent inflammatory rhetoric that could escalate tensions?
Look, I think firstly, we see a lot of excitement, right, which is characteristic in all countries during elections. But the first important thing not to forget is that the ordinary laws which are ordinarily applicable even in the absence of the elections still exist. Even without an election, incitement of violence is a criminal offense. So there's a few categories of basically conduct which one can warrant and one can characterize. There's conduct such as incitement of violence, which is in the Code of Conduct, which even in the absence of the Code of Conduct is in any event a criminal offense. You have criminal conduct, which is not ordinarily criminal conduct, but is criminalized by the Electoral Act. And then you have certain conduct, which is not necessarily a criminal offense, but violates the Code of Conduct. Yes. So incitement of violence is in the Electoral Act, and attracts a particular sanction, which is a fine for the particular individual, right, or in the absence of a fine, jail time. But even in the absence of the Electoral Act, right, even after the elections, incitement of violence is something which is criminalized in a peaceful and democratic society.
Very well.
Yes.
Misinformation and propaganda are also, rampant during election seasons as well. with some campaign materials, spreading falsehood and could lead to sometimes even mislead voters. That's probably the aim of it anyways. The Code of Conduct asks parties to avoid materials that incite violence, like rightfully mentioned. How can the law ensure that political campaigns do not mislead the electorate, and also what mechanisms really exist to hold parties accountable of spreading misinformation?
Look, all parties are signatories. They are signatories to the Code of Conduct. The one we have currently, I think, is from September 2024.
Right.
So all parties that are participating in this election, including the candidates, I think, or unless it's the representatives, but the presidential candidates are signatories to that Code of Conduct.
Right.
So they commit to abide by it. Now, who is your main point of contact if you feel that there's some kind of misinformation or something, some kind of fake news or something terrible being said? First point of contact is the ECN.
Okay.
The ECN has the power in terms of section 152 and 53, I believe, to cancel the registration of any political party if it is that they are constantly violating the Act or the Code of Conduct. So basically what would happen is that if you feel that some misinformation is so extreme that it can't be tolerated, report it to the ECN. ECN will then summon that particular party, ask for an explanation, and if the explanation is not sufficient, then they will take action. Obviously, the action won't be immediate in terms of cancellation, ordinarily, but that's what you should do. Report it immediately to the ECN with as much evidence as you can, because it's a violation of the Code of Conduct. ECN is basically the driver of this entire process on our behalf as citizens and voters.
Absolutely. Yes. Lastly, who exactly is the custodian of the Code of Conduct now? I think you mentioned rightfully that it's the ECN, right?
Yes.
Let's talk about the country's perhaps political maturity now, or the landscape in terms of now that we haven't seen any violence or anyone being taken to court or anybody being reported of any sort of violence or any misinformation that they've made in regards to the election that we're currently having. What does it say about the country's political maturity? Look,
in 1989, just before we had our first elections, there was a law which was passed, which was called, I think, the Intimidation Law. Because at the time we were just coming out of that terrible period. Intimidation was a lot, so they had to pass that law, which is also read into the Code of Conduct. But I think from 1990 till now, even before this Electoral Act, I think we're starting to develop the acceptance that elections should be a peaceful election, should be a fair election, and it should be an election which, even after the election process, citizens and organizations are able to continue to exist. Elections happen once every 5 years. The intensity tends to intensify about a month to 2 months, and even worse, about a week before the election. But currently, I do believe that we are at the stage whereby citizens and organizations have realized that after these elections, we must be able to continue to function as a society. I think there has been quite significant growth in that area. If you think back to the times of formation of RDP, formations of COD, the tensions are not the same. We've seen pictures of social media, in fact, where even though it says that parties must try to campaign far from each other, people tend to. We've seen these videos of people
close proximity,
meeting, greeting. So I think we've come far, and we must keep our fingers crossed and hopeful that we are going to maintain this kind of environment.
Just quickly, Henry, before we let you go, in the event that political parties or candidates, repeatedly violate the Code of Conduct, are there any specific penalties or that they might face, and are they? Do you think that they are effectively applied?
Look, people. There's the incident which we read about recently in the newspaper, where one party, the NEFF, was deregistered because of certain financial issues that they didn't comply with administratively. People must understand that there's no provision in the Act which says that if you don't have your finances in order, you are deregistered. What it says is that if you are constantly not complying with the Act, if you are consistently non-complying with the Act, and you are called and asked to comply, the ECN has the power to deregister you. So I think I think citizens, voters, and political parties must keep their eyes on that particular section 152 and 3, which talks about the cancellation, and that's the ultimate power as your voter. If you detect something from any party, which perhaps, and the worst part of it obviously is violence and intimidation, violence before, and being intimidated during the particular election day. reported immediately to the ECN.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, all in all, what are perhaps your personal opinions about the elections so far, even from a legal perspective as well? What do you see when you see where we are now, just 5 days or 6 days before the elections? And are you perhaps satisfied with how the country is actually performing legally in the election frontier?
Look, we saw a process which, to the best of my knowledge, I don't recall before, where we had political parties. I know that we had something similar when the EVMs were being done, where we had political parties accompanying the ECN to the particular company in South Africa which is producing the ballots, inspecting the ballots, coming back with the ballots, and then seeing the process through. So we are, I believe, at a process, at a stage as a country where there's a serious effort from all organizations towards tolerance and transparency. And I think we must appreciate that. I do think that we are going to see, hopefully, the same kind of attitude in terms of the conduct of the elections.
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, Henry, it's always a pleasure to hear your expert knowledge on this. Of course, we can't wait to perhaps have you on board again for post-election analysis in the legal front. Thank you so much for making the time to talk to us.
Right. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Henry Shimutwikeni is a legal expert. Of course, we're just sharing his knowledge on, that is, the highly anticipated elections that we are looking forward to in terms of the legal fraternity and what actually has been observed from that front. But for now, we're taking you through some of the residents in terms of what the ECN has to say from